Today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the NH option, particularly that I received, and why I looked for an alternative. If you've been offered a treatment that feels more devastating than the disease itself, then you might have some idea about how I felt about the choices that I faced. Now, the NHS for me proposed removing my entire bowel, colon, anus, leaving me with a permanent stoma and a bag to address both the cancer and the ulcerative colitis. After decades of finally getting my ulcerative colitis under control, the solution felt a little bit like changing one life-altering condition for another. And I guess today I'll talk a little bit about my thought processes for seeking alternatives, whilst trying to, I guess, honour the difficulty and the position that people are put in, not just for the patients but also for the doctors, and particularly in our healthcare system, especially since metabolic therapy is getting a lot more traction and getting a lot more awareness out there by people. So I feel at this point I should probably add a little disclaimer. So I'll be talking about things that are from my point of view. My research has led me deeply down the metabolic therapy path, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. I can't give medical advice in any way, shape or form. But I feel like I've got some qualifications in talking about how the lack of information coming from the NHS in general, and particularly when you offer alternatives that aren't considered mainstream, can affect you. So that's a little bit what I'll be talking about, but like I say, I'm in no way qualified to give medical advice, and you really should always discuss this with your own practitioners, because you might find some that are a little more open than I did, but on the whole it does seem that they're just not allowed to give you this kind of treatment. Finding options beyond standard care is not that difficult to do, and you do have to be careful because there's so much money to be made, particularly with people who are in dire straits. Certainly if they've been given a diagnosis that was far beyond mine. My diagnosis was stage 1 cancer. There are many people that don't find out about theirs until they're stage 3 or 4, and it's not just in where it was first discovered, but it might have migrated around the body. So there is something to be said for, in some situations, acting with haste, because not everybody's situation is going to be the same. But even when people are being told that if you're stage 4 there's really nothing we can do, some people are still finding ways to find cures. And I feel like even if on the most part it's anecdotal, because people that go off and do their own thing, you've no real idea what they're doing unless they take the time to document it and share it after the fact, should they be successful. But that is starting to happen more often now. And, I would say that, the one that comes to mind for most people, particularly with metabolic therapy, is Dennis Stacey. I'll grab a link and put it in the description for you to look him up. In fact, if you join school.com/cancer warriors, in one of our classrooms we do actually have his story in there. So actually I'll just leave the school link and you can find it in our group. for me, one of the main considerations, more than just curing the disease or cutting it out as it was preserving quality of life. Sorry, I've got some people just talking to my right here. It's a public park, what can you do? Yeah, I mean, maintaining your physical wholeness is something that I feel a lot of people would be very much interested in maintaining, particularly if, like I say, for me, the option was for like a bag with a stoma, and that's for life. You don't get to reverse that. I mean, there are procedures where it can be reversed, but for the operation they were talking about, for me, not reversible. And so that does put a different light on things, especially when you find potential treatments that could render that entirely redundant. One of the things that I've been finding is that because the dietary side of metabolic therapy, the redo drugs, the off-labels, even the supplements that are now being found to have more and more anti-cancer properties, this stuff is not being taught to oncologists and people dealing with autoimmune diseases. And so when you come across it and you ask them about it, I mean, I've literally been told, I created a list, which is essentially my protocol, my first step into treating myself with metabolic therapy. I gave that list to an oncologist who spent all of 20 seconds looking at it and basically just said, yeah, that ain't going to work. And it's like, really? So my protocol is based on the research that I've done that has essentially found, first of all, the supplements with the most effective outcomes. They've had the highest efficacy, and I've found a number of supplements that get close to the dosages to match what were done in the trials. They're obviously not necessarily being administered. All of mine are tablets. There may have been instances in some of the trials where they were given intravenously, or it might have been mixed with other drugs. And quite often what you do find is that any testing that you can find with standard supplements off the shelf, even high dose ones, when they're used in trials, they are often used with chemotherapy / radiotherapy, sometimes immunotherapy, and it's more the improvement in outcome for the combination that they're looking at. But even when they're doing these tests in a petri dish, they're still finding some quite amazing outcomes. And whilst that doesn't always translate into the body, the fact that these have been used in combination studies and the results have been, in some cases, vastly improved, you have to think to yourself that there's probably something to it. And clearly this is not a series of studies that are making it into the hands of practicing oncologists, because for them to look at essentially 10 supplements with 3 off-label drugs in there, one of them is essentially prescription only, for you to be told basically in a 20-second quick rundown of having a look at the list that it's not going to work. It's like, well, thanks for the pep talk, but I think I'll stick with my research, thanks, because that's, clearly coming from a place of where people are looking to try and find answers rather than just to dismiss or poo-poo the whole idea. So essentially, what I've been finding is because there's so little information within practitioners in the NHS, and this goes from people right at the top. For my particular case, I'm dealing with some of the best people in their fields in the NHS for ulcerative colitis. I've been referred to a very good oncologist at UCLH. I've had people, specialists that I've been referred to for looking at resectioning to remove certain parts of the bowel, so they're specialists in that area. And essentially they've all come back saying, no, just take the whole lot out. That's the only option. And yet for somebody who is, fairly active, having no side effects, and really, if you spent a day with me, you just couldn't tell that I've got anything wrong with me at all, apart from a sick sense of humour sometimes. What they're suggesting, so that change in quality of life and the irreversible procedure really does make it feel like, for me, it's absolutely the wrong choice. I also have other considerations that I would need to take into consideration. So, for example, in my younger years, certainly before my mid-20s, I had a lot of problems with eczema, psoriasis, all autoimmune related conditions still. And even now that I'm off of the drug that was treating my ulcerative colitis, I have noticed that my skin is a bit more itchy again. Fortunately, it seemed to be quite temporary, in as much as I did have, after the first couple of weeks, quite a lot of irritation on my skin, but it seems to be calming down. So it's almost like it was a slightly higher reaction from just coming off of them, and I'm getting into the stride. I mean, it's still not completely gone, but for me, that's a concern, that if I was to start sticking a bag to my stomach all day, every day for the rest of my life because I have a stoma, what happens if that reaction, because I get contact dermatitis, what happens if I start getting blistering underneath the contact areas? The reason you'll never see me wear any rings, no necklaces, I don't wear watches, is because I never know when my skin's just going to start being irritated by something contacting it. And so I don't know if that's going to be a problem if I switch to sticking a bag onto my stomach every day for the rest of my life. I feel like it could be at some times, and it's not like you can just choose to move it to the other side or down a bit or up a bit. When the skin gets irritated, it comes up in tiny little blisters, it itches like crazy, you scratch it, it bursts the little blisters, it crusts over, and then you're not going to get a good seal on the bag, and it's just like, man, things could go downhill really quite badly. So yeah, I mean, coming back to the doctors and what they're allowed to prescribe, I do feel like I have to touch on that a little bit, because I don't blame them for not being able to give me what I want. It's definitely something that I would like more help with. I've spoken about that in previous videos, even, monitoring, various stats, bloods, toxicities and things like that would be a help. But because it falls under the alternative therapies, they're just not allowed to help with that. And even if they went off and read all about it and learned all about it and thought, actually, do you know what? This would be great. We could use this in a kind of standard of care, because, there are results out there. There are studies that show this stuff works. Because it hasn't come down through the higher ups, I think in the UK it's NICE that kind of determine what doctors are allowed to prescribe. Because it hasn't come through them, even if they all understand it and think it's a great idea, they're still not allowed to prescribe it. And so the system is fundamentally not providing the best level of care for patients, not because they can't, because they're not allowed to. And that's where I see the changes being needed. So I think there does need to be more looked into on the side of the NHS, but I can't see that happening anytime soon, unfortunately, because to test metabolic therapy with a rigorous trial and study like you would for a single drug being developed by Big Pharma, from the people that I've spoken to, it does feel like there would just be too many hurdles, and there would also be ethical considerations as well. And so really, this is going to have to come from the ground up. People like me finding the solution, deciding that what the NHS has offered isn't right for me, it's not good enough, destroying my quality of life forever, when there's a potential alternative available, for me just is never going to be the right option. So yeah, I think, just to wrap it all up, for my condition, because of the long-term ulcerative colitis, because many of the intermediary steps that could be taken for somebody that hasn't had my condition for as long as I've had it might be viable, they just weren't for me. The risks of doing any one of those, like resectioning, temporary stomas, even radiotherapy, has a huge risk for me, much higher than a normal person. Chemotherapy similarly could cause, my inflammation to flare up. So none of these are really an option for me. So this is why I'm only getting the one option of, completely life-changing operation from the NHS. But in my humble, non-medical, but I consider well-researched opinion, it's the best for me. Each of you will have to decide what your own risk and benefit analysis is for your disease. But I would urge you to look into it, even if you feel like you want to go with the standard of care, there are things that you can do to make your outcomes better. So thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, please do comment below if you've got any questions. And if you are able to make even a small donation, even a few pounds would be really great for me, because every little really, really does help at this stage, because the treatments that I'm looking at in metabolic therapy will run into the thousands. And like I say, it's something that could be ongoing. So hopefully I get a handle on it very quickly. But if I don't, I will need the funds available to be able to keep pressing and testing to ensure that I get the outcome that I'm looking for, which is to clear up the cancer, keep the inflammation of the ulcerative colitis down, and keep my standard of quality as good as it can be, which is as much as normal as it can be, like today. So yeah, sorry, this one's gone on just a little bit longer than I intended, but yeah, I hope you found a little bit useful in some places. And like I say, please do keep updated. Get subscribed for the next update, because that's really helpful for me too. So yeah, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next update.